We'll begin our next conversation on the recent passage of the 2025 Appropriation Bill of 54.9 trillion naira.
All right, and we're now being joined here in the studio by Dr. Emeka Okengu, a development economist and farmer. Very important. A pleasure to welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
I actually appreciate being called a farmer. Good Morning Nigeria.
Now, 54.9 trillion naira budget passed yesterday by the National Assembly, the biggest in history. Well, in some quarters there is excitement, but beyond the figures, what does this mean in practical terms for Nigeria and for Nigerians? Okay,
let's stay with the figures before we go beyond the figures. I mean, it's not the biggest if you juxtapose it with the costs and exchange rates we had in the times past. You might be shocked that it might be one of the smallest. Okay, if you now start, exchanging that at the rates we used to. So I think it's also consequent on, the price of forex. Okay. Now, having said that, it's a good way to go. I see some very interesting moves by government to be able to address issues. I mean, the injection of 300 billion into the health sector to hedge probably the funding supports that we get externally. It's a very good move for me because I am not a proponent of aid. Okay, so it simply begins to start a process where we can start owning our own process. All right. But having said that, I also would have thought that in our development stride, especially with the government's commitment to food security and livestock development, and this is where me being a farmer would come in, I would have thought that a lot of focus should have been put in that area, especially vis-a-vis the allied infrastructure you need to be able to get, food security in place, and that will be energy. Having also said that, I'll close on the fact that now that we're getting more independent and we're looking inwards, I would have also wanted a situation where we would have looked at the steel sector. Now that the solid mineral sector was allocated $1 trillion, okay, because solid mineral sector is actually the back end of the steel sector. I would have said that yes, government is working towards privatizing our steel facilities, but there's a lot of work, that needs to be done for you to be able to, attract that kind of investments, especially knowing that steel is development and development is steel. I didn't see those areas, getting the kind of attention I thought they should get.
All right. If you say the other areas that got priority, would you say that that's putting the right peg, or if you like, a right peg in the right holes, talking about education, healthcare, and then outside the 300 billion, which is for the health sector, the extra 400 billion, I mean, the budget was increased by about 700 billion. Would you say that that's necessary?
Well, because we don't have the back end, we don't have the narratives, okay, we don't have the history to that increase. Well, what's important is that the people who increased are allowed by law to increase it. So that would be the argument. I don't argue what I'm not able to, interrogate. For me, 54 trillion for a country of 200 and something million people is very minuscule. It's very small. I mean, this would be a budget of a small mine, okay, or a medium-scale mine somewhere else. There are corporations who run this as their departmental budgets, because you're technically talking about 36 billion, dollars or something in that range. So when you're hearing trillion, that's what I'm saying to you, that if you drill it down, you find out that this is not a lot of money. I mean, 36 billion for a large corporation might just be money that are allocating to research alone. That's my point. So if we want to move from where it is, I mean, we should be aiming at trillions in dollars in our budgeting system, but we have to now look at those priority areas that can be able to unlock it. Why wouldn't we be like China? China today is talking about, creating artificial stones, creating artificial moons, creating all sorts of things. And why are they doing this? Because they are focusing on their steel sector. Look at every other country in the UAE that have oil like we do have oil. There was a deliberate action to exit, oil and move towards steel. Go and check it out. All of them have, are now in the trillion, economy scale because of their utilization of steel and allied outputs. So that's very key. We have a new economy now just because of creating it. I mean, the blue economy has generated, from what it is I read, billions and billions in dollars by just aggregating. Imagine if you put a business aspect to that. Imagine if we have ability to be able to now create those things that can, facilitate the things that happen in our blue economy. Being able to build our ships and boats, being able to, replenish our waterways, being able to train the human capital. These things are areas I think that we should be focusing on. And then that brings me to the fact that I didn't see a lot in the way of research. Because whatever it is you do, R&D is critical and central. I didn't also see a lot of allocation to our research institute and centers. These are very key areas for me. Health is fine, but health depends on research.
Well, now that we are here, I had asked earlier, what does this mean in practical terms for Nigeria? You've picked a lot of holes, in the process and maybe the final outcome. What does this mean in terms of everyday living for the Nigerian?
Well, I think it means that there's a determination by government for us to start thinking right and working right, and that should be commended. That's what it means. It simply means that all of us, and nobody is going to be spoon-fed again, okay? It might be tough, okay? Like they say in sports, for those who are sports people, the first thing they tell you is no pain, no gain. Okay, so the pain is here, no doubt about it, but the gain is in sight, and that's important. So our role is to it's only God that has knowledge about everything. While you bring in people on your shows, it's probably for us to be able to take it from angles that can be able to now get government to begin to look again. So I think it's a good move forward. Nothing is cast in stone. Okay, this is not the only budget we're going to be having, but I think those critical areas, like we looked at the health sector, we should have also now identified these other critical areas. Yes, we talked about education, you're right, but education has to be tied to, what you call the realities on ground now. Formal education, A, B, C, D, in my own language, is no longer the way to go. Okay, now, if you're going to be walking into this web-based AI kind of education, you need to get the tools. And if you start producing those tools locally, this is where science and tech again comes into play. Then imagine if we could start making computers and tabs, for our kids in primary school, and then we're localizing that production. Do you know what that would mean? So these are the kind of things I'm talking about, really.
Did we get our priorities right, in your opinion, for every area, if you dissect?
As a development economist, I would say it's work in progress, because it's really unfair for you to sweep away a lot of work people have done. We could have done better than we've done now. Okay, for me, taking it from the perspective of this new Nigeria that we're working towards, and remember, it's a 15-year match. Sometimes when people will hear about the 15 years thing, I tell them that that's realistic. I mean, it's not even going to be realizable if we don't keep faith, okay, to the match and the demands of a match. So those priorities, if you want to get it right, will be to now classify it under three broad, factors or variables. One, your human capital. Two, your natural resources. Three, your technology. That's what grows a nation. Now, if you're able to turn your human resources into human capital, okay, then you become competitive locally and internationally. If you're able to turn your natural resources, okay, into products that can be globally, competitive, you now start, chasing a position in the Committee of States and, the global markets. Now, the way to do this is technology and education. So if you're able to fix your education, all right, and then get people who are skilled, all right, and it becomes the basis of moving forward, then that's the way to go for me.
All right, many thanks, Dr. Okengo. But looking at the specifics of this budget, 54.9 trillion, 3.6 trillion is for statutory transfers, 14.3 trillion for debt service, 13 trillion for recurrent, so that's non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 23.9 trillion is for contribution to the development fund for capital expenditure. Looking at how the 2024 budget performed, do you see this hitting its targets?
Yeah, I do, but I also see that there must be synergies. Okay, if this is the federal budget and not the national budget, it's important you also, make that distinction. If you're talking about the national budget, then we won't be talking about, the 54.9 trillion. We'll be talking about 59.9 trillion, inclusive of a budget of the subnationals. Then you can now have a whole. Okay, but this is the budget of the national. Okay. Or federal government of Nigeria. Now, what happens to budgets is that usually there are financial plans that you couch in figures. So it is one thing to have a budget, is another thing to be able to fund the budget. All right, and it is the funding aspect of the budget that actually now determines if you are able to hit target. It is not the money, because this 54 trillion, like they also listed, is not in any vault. Okay, waiting to, be packed and then given to people. So there has to also be, getting the money and then being able to, fund the projects.
Now, the much vaunted January to December budget cycle seems to have been lost now, at least with this year. Does that have any implications?
Well, for me, budgets are not supposed to be. This is why we had what you call the rolling plans way back. Okay, budgets are not supposed to be cast. Maybe you're recurrent, yes, you can do it. I mean, you need to pay your staff and then get what it is you need to run that, financial year or something. But when it comes to capital budget, it's almost impossible for you to be able to accomplish most capital projects within a 1-year cycle. Okay, and some of the aspects of this budget will be seasonal, will be season-based. Okay, because if you're looking at agriculture now, for instance, if you have not released any money, or if you're not going to be releasing money to agriculture now to go and do whatever that needs to be done, land preparation, land plowing, land clearing, seed acquisition, ABCD. If you release that money to them in September, there's no way you can expect them, to hit target by December. Even if you give it to them by March, because the procurement process will now begin to also now take its own run. So what's important is that our budgeting system, for me, if I'm to advocate, we need to return to the rolling cycles, so that whatever is left is rolled over. And then you don't even need to roll over by going back to the National Assembly. You can just have, a 5-year program. Like you just have your MTEF, okay? Just roll it over for 5 years, and then you can now begin to, against your MIE, against your outputs and inputs, you can now begin to either add or retract or whatever. Okay.
All right. As we begin to round up this conversation, for you as an economist, you understand these figures. You may likely understand, how government does what it does. But for the average person watching you at this point, hearing these figures is just, they've come again. It's another budget. I mean, what really needs to be done? How do we, bridge the gap? Yeah. Such that the average Nigerian feels the impact, of this budget?
I think the first thing to do is to know that the local government chairman is like the president in that local government and has responsibilities. That's the first thing to do. And to now begin to call out people. Okay, this is where transparency comes in. Just like you talk about the ESG, okay, the environmental sustainable governance programs that is being promoted anymore everywhere now for transparency. The second will be for an alignment, and this is very important, of the national and the subnational budgeting systems and programs, so that everybody now knows where he ties in where. Because for all of us now looking at this national budget, and we're forgetting we come from states and local governments. So for the average person, what needs to be done is that there has to be information on what government is doing and how what government is doing at local government A, okay, ties to state A and ties to the federal government vis-a-vis that circle. So you will not start building economies. You will not start building belts, project belts. Okay, that's the way to do it if it's going to be impactful. So that when that money is released to the Ministry of Agriculture, you know that another money similar has been released to the Ministry of Agriculture in a state. You know that something similar has been released to the federal local government in a state. Now, being part of that system is for you to now go to your local government chairman, if you can, and you should, to say, Oga, this thing that is happening in Abuja, is it not supposed to be happening in our place? And it's supposed to be, from what it is, I know that's happening. If that is done, then you can begin to now have proper citizen participation in the development, process of a country or a society.
And of course, it's one thing to budget; it's another thing to implement it. Do you see this budget be, implemented 100%? Of course, begin, for instance, with funding.
Yes, I see determination. I see determination. I see a determination for there to be a paradigm shift. No matter how much you want to look at it, I see the federal government determined to do things a little bit differently. And even if you look at the renaming of some of the MDAs that are operational now, you find out that there's actually a very determined effort for government to move from where we were before. Okay, maybe blue and red line to something a little bit artistic and innovative. As for full implementation, like I said earlier, it is going to be driven by the availability of funds. So
where will they come from, the funds?
Well, we're doing well in funds. Some of us are struggling now. Some of us are now putting off, like in my own case, I'm not ashamed to say it, I turn off my NEPA by 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock and I go on inverter. If it juices out, so be it. Okay, I'm able to get lights up to the morning, so be it. So everybody, even at that, but you're still spending money. Okay, we're contributing. Taxes are being paid now. More people are beginning to get tax conscious, and it's going to, get a little bit tougher. So government is saying to us that they are doing a lot of savings from both subsidies of energy, because a lot of people do not realize that you have more subsidies in the energy sector than you even have in the oil and gas. So if we are getting all these savings from these subsidies, government, even if it's not awash with funds, should be able to get credit worthy to make up whatever it is that it's getting. So I don't think funding might be such a huge problem. I mean, look at solid minerals. I mean, an agency in solid minerals, the mining cadastre office, generating over 1 trillion. Okay, I mean, it's a big deal. Okay. Yeah,
all right.
So what's celebrating?
Many thanks, Dr. Emeka Okengu. Many thanks for joining us for this conversation.
Pleasure to be here.
Development economist. So it's a pleasure to have you.
So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a privilege. Thank you.
All right. So that's our bit on Good Morning Nigeria this Friday. Many thanks for watching. Enjoy your weekend. By the way, it's Valentine's Day. I hear that Victor has plans.
Well, I am Victor as well. No plans for Valentine, but happy Valentine's Day.